So today I wanted to discuss on this session 2 the ways that we get involved with life. Specifically, the way that we get all tangled up, mixed up with the situations that occur in our daily lives and how they impact, and in many cases, really shake up the mind, our state of being. What often happens is that in studying the Dhamma, the principles of the Dhamma, Buddhist principles, we think that those are one thing, and my life as an individual is another. The person who is going through these situations, circumstances, thoughts, and feelings is one, and the Dhamma, the Buddha's teachings, are another. And then life happens. So life happens and all hell breaks loose. So here you have the Dhamma, and here you have, you, I, my life, etc. So life comes in, and the connection that you had with the Dhamma suddenly feels lost. Now, this is a different way of explaining, of course, the way that we might have been trained, or, when you're studying the Dhamma, you're seeing a lot of breakdowns, a lot of numbers, a lot of categorizations, a lot of hierarchical, and in many cases, linear structures to be followed. So we have, for example, things like the 5 aggregates, right? And that's a breakdown of the person. So earlier I was saying, the person, I or you. What is that? Well, we have the 5 aggregates, right? The khandhas. I like to put double K because sometimes it's not, it doesn't do justice to the Pali phrasing, the word itself. So khandha is an aggregate, right? So we have the different, what is a person? What is this thing called me, myself? The way that we see it represented or taught is in 5. Pancha khandha. Pancha means 5. So pancha khandha. So, but what are they? We have rupa, we have vedana, we have sanya, which we talked about extensively last time. We have sankhara, or plural, sankhara. And then we have vijnana. So these can be seen as a categorization. This is a breakdown of a self, right? The I, etc. And if there's an I, there's also a you. There's a they. There's this, there's that. So here you have 5 breakdowns that make up this life. So when you are going through life's difficulties, this is happening. What or where is the Dhamma at that time? Is it reachable? Is it accessible? Usually it's not. There's a lot of chaos, and what we have been able to do usually is pushing our way through life. Maybe hold on to a principle of the Dhamma, right? Such as telling yourself or reminding yourself of anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, suffering or dissatisfaction or unsatisfactoriness, and non-substantiality of the self. So this is what becomes for many of us like a mantra, an affirmation that you keep kicking your heels into the ground and saying, anicca, 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 this too shall pass. Now this can help dealing with life. Yes, it can, but it's temporary. The mind is too pulled in to what's happening with the reality of life for it to go and really gain any wisdom from whatever is taking place. What then we need to be considering often, if not always, is that in seeing the Dhamma, we must not seeing it be something superimposed or pressed upon life. What essentially I'm trying to say is that life and Dhamma are one and the same. Where does that leave us, the I, the you, the person, the self? What's happening there? Where is that? Well, I mentioned this before. Avidya. Avidya comes in and does this. Avidya comes in and says, well, this is a special circumstance. We have to make an exception here. Why? Because I have these thing called memories. I have these thing called experiences. I have these things called feelings, etc. Those make me the special case, make my life a special situation, a special scenario, which means that this is pretty solid. This is pretty permanent. unchanging, stable, fixed, etc., etc. What? Life. Well, guess what? All of these have nothing to do with the Dhamma. Why? Because we just saw earlier the three sinyatas, or the signs, or three characteristics that Lord Buddha discovered, namely, again, I'll put it here, anicca, which is impermanence. So there goes that with the permanence thing. And then we have dukkha. That means, by the way, these two go together. Because of the fact that life is anicca, then there will be dukkha. So really, we must develop an understanding and a maturity in approach. Because it is, after all, avidya, that willful ignoring from our part, that says, no, 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 no. When the good thing is happening, when the pleasurable experience is happening, we say, we want you to stay unchanged, stay fixed, stable, please. Why can't you, my loved one, I'm holding this and that, this lovely experience, why can't you stay and be permanent? Well, that means you are completely going against life. Nowhere in life will you find permanency, or stability. You will not find a single electron, let alone an atom or a molecule on top of that, that is fixed. Nothing is fixed. It's always changing. By the way, in case you're wondering what happened, Bhante, with the third characteristic, we've been talking about it all along. Anatta is the opposite of what these actual four are trying to say. These are advocating for this, atta, a self, an unchanging self, which, by the way, as you start to break it down, as you start to maturely look at the phenomenon of life, you will see that it is anything but stable, fixed, one, substantial. Nothing is substantial in that sense, because everything that is conditioned is unstable, unreliable. And that's why we have the holy life. Okay? So I'll erase this. And okay, it's going. Okay, so I'm learning how to use this, so there we go. That's good. So where was I? Now, I want us to go to back to the very well represented principle, in fact, the key teaching of the Dhamma, specifically. Law of dependent arising, dependent origination, etc. Different terms. This, Lord Buddha says, in fact, Venerable Sariputta says, he who sees the Dhamma sees the Paticca Samuppāda. See, he who sees the Paticca Samuppāda sees the Dhamma. So they are one and the same, essentially. Why? Because remember those categories that I was mentioning, the breakdown that we do in our head, the calculations that we do emotionally. Yes, emotional calculations, which are conclusions. And in the absence of wisdom or panya, guess what happens? These are all unreliable. Why? Because we have this thing earlier we talked about, right? Avidya. Avidya comes in and puts so much clout, so much attention, so much importance upon my emotional state. And in the presence of so much ignorance, the conclusion that's being made, and life continuously happening, dot, dot, dot. Here would be a good place for a dot, dot, dot. We're going to end up what? Doing what? Conclusions. And setting us back to do what? And we're back into the vicious cycle again. Last time I drew the infinity symbol, right? For the closed loop of suffering, I think I call it. But that's pretty much what we're stuck in. Why? Because of this guy, this avidya. So you could know so much. You could have studied Dhamma for a whole lifetime. But ultimately, when that moment, when an event takes place, okay, some event is taking place in your life, and you were going about your, business, and everything was fine, and then this event took place, and you were like happy-go-lucky in a Dhammic state. At least that's what you believe. And everything was nice, and you were calm and tranquil, and you're walking out. By the way, let's say you're walking out of a retreat. So the retreat was happening there, and you came out to life, and life is a series of events. Suddenly, there's a big shock, and we get upset. We get tired. We get to lose our composure. We get to lose tranquility. Gone. Why? Because, I mean, if the Dhamma is a teaching that has helped countless beings, if the Dhamma has helped you even when you were in a state of tranquility, when you were even having insights during the retreat, and you were indeed in a Dhammic state, you weren't let's say, most probably you were not deluding yourself. You were truly in a Dhammic state, as in, for example, a state of metta. You were exuding metta. And there was even panya, meaning insights were taking place. Insights, where you have a lot of aha moments, one after the other. And you say, wow, I'm about to become an arahant, or maybe I am. Wait a minute. Let me pinch myself. I've never reached a state of deep understanding as this. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And then we leave the retreat or the meditation cushion at home, And then something happens, something unexpected. An event takes place. Now, that event could be anything you can imagine. You name it. But what it does create is a series of, let's just draw a marker here, separation. We have a jolt, like they like an EKG or EEG. There is like, spikes and troughs on the monitor, which means there's a jolt, which means there is an emotion that is tied to that event. Now, what we do is, remember that mantra I was saying that we do? Remember, it's a good thing to have these tools, by the way, to say, yes, life is anicca. Take it easy. This is you telling yourself, it's okay. It's okay. I've been there before, so why is this situation even different than the previous ones I've had? So let me learn from my past. Okay, that's wonderful. But sometimes the emotion is so tremendous that we want to destroy it or press it, like you put it under a heavy vehicle crushing type of a thing. Visuals are wonderful, I've discovered, and I love to use whatever tools we have to crush the emotion, but you can't do that because life is happening, right? So you have other events that will come up. And this is another reason why many people go and practice, even telling themselves that, yes, I'm practicing metta, metta, metta. Yes, I'm going to push away the anger. I'm going to push down and obliterate frustration, which, by the way, in the English-speaking world, somehow anger was substituted with frustration. If you're filling up like applications and for to be seen by a therapist or in official arenas or I guess places where you have to express emotions and things, many times I notice people are using now frustration to express anger. No, anger is anger. Thank you very much. Don't try to minimize the nuclear power of anger with frustration, because frustration is one thing and anger is another. Of course, there is frustration in there, but is it on such a low level from what anger's spikes are doing? They're all over the place, the spikes. It's an earthquake. It's a volcanic eruption when anger happens. So how in the world is my affirmation really going to crush this emotion? Right? By the way, when you're applying your whatever Dhamma you had probably learned or studied, in that moment of trying to obliterate emotion, you are not practicing Panya. You are definitely not practicing the Dhamma. Okay? So, what are you practicing if you're not doing that? Those two. Remember avidya? That's what we're practicing. So, what then is necessary? What then it is required of us is to observe. And this is why we sit. To develop strength, to develop endurance, to develop patience, to develop understanding. So Paticca Samuppāda is not a series of terms that we are supposed to memorize. So it's not a series of words. There are some schools in the Theravada tradition, at least, that keep on reciting, let's say, avijja pacchaya sankhara, sankhara pacchaya vijnana, etc. They repeat that. So because of ignorance, there are the sankharas, the generative causes, or the preparations, or the habitual tendencies. And because of those, there is vijnana, consciousness. Because of that, these are just when the emotional state kicks in, because of that event that we were talking about. That series of, the memorization, telling yourself the mantra, might help at times, but it all depends on the level of emotional impact that you're facing. So what can you do? This does not mean, by the way, the Paticca Samuppāda principle or the teaching that Lord Buddha gave us, this powerful, powerful tool of understanding and deciphering what's really going on, is not working, or is not, there's something flawed about it. No. But you don't have to go through the 12 links, all of them, one at a time necessarily, in that moment when it's so hot. There's the heat of the emotion. There is the heat of the feeling, agitation that you've experienced, and you're still undergoing that. So we need to understand that portion. So if you could just hone in on the feeling portion of the Paticca Samuppāda. I'm not going to explain it here, all 12 of them, obviously, because it's quite extensive. So I've done it in different videos, in different lectures. But let's go back to the most obvious thing that is undeniable for the experiencer of that event, meaning the Vedana, or feeling, or sensation. This is undeniable. This is a fact. This is what gets you out of your skin. This is what gets you, your heart racing. But why did it happen? There was an event. How did you know about the event? There was contact with the outside world, with the sense, thanks to the senses. 6 senses. Right? Now the event took place. So out of the 6 senses, let's say the eyes caught that person, as they say in America, flipping you off, making an obscene gesture with their hand at you, derogatory thing that they're saying, let's say. So it was audible, or audible and, so audio visual, so you saw it and you heard it. So we're talking about those 2 senses, the eyes, ears, giving you contact with the outside world, and that it can be called definitely an event. But what happened to these 2? The event took place. Event is done itself. Historically speaking, temporally speaking, the event itself is over. In fact, the eyes and the ears have done their job. It's over for them. So what that leaves us with is just one of those senses, and that is the mind. Lord Buddha calls it specifically mano vijnana. We don't have in Buddhism a consciousness, capital C, as the person. We basically have only 6 and that is reference to the six senses, which the mind is part of. So this, the mind itself, is then the one who carries over the event. It works with proxies. It's the carrier of memories. The mind keeps carrying, just like Santa Claus's bag full of goodies. What it does carry, however, are memories, sannyas, the thoughts of feelings, which are still, we're talking about memories, perceptions, which we talked about again last time. Perceptions are that are sanya. So the mind is the one that's carrying all this junk. But the event happened, no? Yes, it did. When? In the past. The contact happened, yes. When? In the past. But there's another contact taking place, isn't there? The mind, it keeps on regurgitating the memory. Of what? Of how it felt. Again, we're back to feeling. See, this is where we are encountering the power of our emotions. And here I am going back and forth with feeling and emotions. In Buddhism, in the Dhamma, we have basically three categories of feelings. We have pleasant or pleasurable. We have painful. And we have neutral. Okay? So we usually hover or go back and forth between pleasure and pain. So these are very loud. And typically what we do in between these two, in fact, between pleasure and pain, if you really measure or look at our tendency to hold on to memories, what always wins the race is the painful one, oddly enough. But that's one side of the pendulum, right? One extreme, but with the promise of pleasure. So we accept pain only for the sake of the promise of gaining pleasure by getting rid of the pain. But our obsession has to do with the negative feeling. All right? So I'm going to go ahead and erase this again. Oh, there's erase. Oh, nice. Okay. They've done research, and there's plenty of there are plenty of studies done on this, and I mentioned this also in my I did talk about this extensively in the dissertation I was doing on mindful grounding and trauma, where I used the Dhamma, the principles of the Dhamma. That doesn't mean just sati, by the way, but also the presence and the importance of incorporating sila, virtue. And with that, you can gain understanding, because that's how powerful it is, the Dhamma, the teachings. Now, when we are talking about the tendency, our tendency to suffer or to continuously recall memories, painful memories of the past, and suffer because of them, what we're talking about is a pattern. The pattern itself is called the negative bias. This is not my term, of course. This is what scientists and researchers, neurologists, neuroscientists, and especially in the field of trauma, have coined, because the mind has a tendency to dwell on the negative. If you've lived on this planet long enough, it's really difficult for you to argue that, given the experiences, given the events taking place in one's life, and how you struggle and struggle and struggle. It feels like you're like Atlas lifting up the weight of the whole planet as you're going up a mountain, right? And by the way, negative bias comes in and pours in oil underneath your feet while it's raining, and you're carrying that heavy load. That's how it is for many people dealing with trauma. And unfortunately, I really have a hard time thinking that there are people out there who are not traumatized, because we all are. We all are. And that's, Lord Buddha's way of describing dukkha, the way I see it. It's so powerful. Now, to keep talking about the Dhamma, to keep throwing principles at yourself, is not going to get rid of dukkha. You can only understand the Dhamma and therefore get rid of dukkha is by your incorporation. It only takes place if you are applying. It's the application of these principles of Dhamma onto life. So your life is really the way to penetrate, to really understand what we're talking about. So earlier, I was mentioning, and I'll go back to that. So I mentioned about the mind, right? The carrier of memories, the sense, right? Mano vijnana, the sixth sense. That's what we mean in Buddhist terms. It's not like that movie that came out, Psychic, the kid seeing ghosts and things. So mind, or mano vijnana, is what constantly drags in memories from the past. In fact, it keeps the tune, the rhythm going throughout your life. What type of a tune? The emotional tune. It keeps playing. You probably have experienced individuals in your life where you're in good terms with them, or you thought you were, or something wonderful happened, and then you see them an hour or two later, and you were around them, nothing bad happened for them to be upset. Or this might be happening to you, where you look at your state and you say, why am I upset? Why am I so annoyed? Why am I so down? This is what is taking place. The emotional tune is the common denominator between one moment and another, one event taking place in your life and another. So this creates this theme, this background color. It's almost like the ground upon which you place your home furniture. You go in and there's a common denominator, in this case, the ground itself, the floor upon which every piece of furniture is going to go to rest upon. So that emotional tune itself is going to be clouding what's really taking place, because during the day there's different events taking place. Good, bad, neutral, usually neutral. But the mind is going to, thanks to this, it's going to go ahead, and sometimes you're going to have some events that are not so pleasant. I get it. That's called life. But guess what it's going to do? It's going to, the mind, that is, thanks to its involvement and unquestionable obedience to how we feel and why we feel that, whether it is justified or not. It doesn't care. It's happening. Why? Because no one's asking for its papers, as they say. No one is checking the legitimacy of this emotional tune. Like, why am I upset? Because something happened way past in the maybe they remembered a memory or a dream they saw, having nothing to do with real life. But it was so jolting, it was so upsetting, but that made a mark. So it became an event in absentia. Imagine that, meaning sleep. So the mind says, I feel terrible. Why? Because, well, I don't know. I just feel terrible. Why though? When you probe and you see that, wait a minute, they had a dream which woke up certain feelings. Again, we come back to that. And this, the mind, because it is unwise, meaning it is not with sati, which is what we are after all the time. And this is where the Paticca Samuppāda comes alive. And by the way, conversely, Paticca Samuppāda does not work at all without sati. No matter how many times you memorize the links of causal relations of Paticca Samuppāda, you need this sati. So, in the absence of sati, the emotional tune is going to carry you over and start making you have this biased view of things. Meaning, remember those events taking place throughout the day? It's going to go ahead and hone in on those tiny little events and say, you see this? No, don't bother about these big events. Yeah, I know I got a promotion. Yes, I know that my friend came and apologized to me, and genuinely so, I think. But do you remember what they did here 7 years ago? If they really meant it, they would never have done that thing over there. I know it's little compared to these big things that are happening. These little things then, and by the way, they don't have to occur with so much frequency. It might just be one of them, but one that, so long as the mind is fixated on and supported by the emotional tune that's going on underneath it, it's a terrible event that's ongoing. Which means what? We're back to dukkha land. We actually never left, right? So you see, this is the world, this is the life, this is the thinking of a putujjana. This is the state that anyone experiencing dukkha is in, because there is no sati. Sati is not just mindfulness, like some characters have been saying. It's not just remembering to remember and that's it. Sati allows you the dignity to be human. Sati allows you the audacity to be alive. So it gives you the audacity to be alive. So it gives us the integrity of owning up to what's happening to the mind, to what's really taking place. To be able to see these things taking place means that you're applying sati properly. Why? Because there is panya developing. Then it's no longer about memorizing what the Buddha taught. It's about, or the texts, or trying to remember all the suttas or the discourses or the principles, or repeating to yourself the Paticca Samuppāda links. Those are all great if you can, if you have the means, if you have all the tools. But what Lord Buddha again and again reiterates or stresses in this case is just to know one thing. Sometimes that's all you need. And when life is happening with many, many, many events, then to be able to think about all these different principles, it's really going to be quite daunting. You're going to really have to struggle. For this, we need to come back to sati. Sati allows you to anchor yourself, okay? Ground yourself. Okay, it allows you to ground yourself through what? You can use the body, which is a great tool to ground yourself with. And specifically, we can use the postures, the 4 postures. We can use the breath, of course. You can use the senses, specifically tactile perception, all right, among other things. But body is what I really would recommend to ground the person in, even if they're doing some specific meditation, such as metta practice, loving kindness. You need to first ground yourself. Otherwise, you're just doing something intellectual or something, like visualization based. And metta is not that. It might have a little bit, very little of it, but mostly it is about a person who's grounded oneself. Anyhow, coming back to sati. Sati, after you've grounded yourself, and it's not just once, by the way, you check in, you check in, you check in, check in. Then you are looking and observing life. This is why it's teaching us responsibility. It is through observation that you will be able to look for and see patterns. The best, the greatest pattern ever discovered by any being is the Paticca Samuppāda, which the Buddhas discover. The greatest pattern, because everything is in it. Everything is in it, imaginable. It's not some physics or mathematical equation or some E equals MC squared type of a pattern. No, no, no. Because the person who discovered it and the person who is understanding it, etc., are still in the cesspit of suffering, their own suffering. Why? Because there is avidya. So the Paticca Samuppāda reveals, exposes what? Avidya. And what is avidya? It is willful, I like to call it that, ignoring. Willful. On part of whom? Us. Our part. We are the responsible. We are the authors of the ignoring. But what are you ignoring? I mean, come on, you were there with the principles of Dhamma playing in your ears, and you were probably listening to Dhamma talks as that person flipped you off as you were walking, minding your own business, smiling and giving metta to others. What happened? You ignored the body. That means you did not ground yourself. You had left the breath. That's what happens when people feel angry. You become desensitized. You don't feel. There's no sensitivity. To what? To your body. But what is the sensitivity towards, if there is one? What, in this case, what is the dominant state? anger. In fact, it's so overwhelming. You cannot tell heads or tails. You are completely absorbed in it. You are in the vortex of identification. Sati is not there, basically. So many words, that's what I'm trying to say. Sati. So, let's see here. So sati usually has with it also plus sampajanya, which is full awareness. So if you call sati mindfulness, the other one would be called full awareness of your body, your presence, your space, your place in space and time, etc. So earlier I was talking about mind, right? And I mentioned about memories that the mind carries. Those, we call them dhammas, dhammas with a small d, or dhamma, which basically are mind objects. Memories, right? Thoughts, ideas, etc. But if you were following me all this time, you remember how these have a weight to them. These can make you fall back into that emotional tune I was saying, the thing that's playing in the background, quietly but very much powerful in its presence, in its strong presence, in its strong odor, if you will, the emotional odor. So what happens then is, I mentioned the identification part. Where does that play? How does that come in? And its relationship to avidya. It comes in and looks at the objects, the memory, such as, the memory, that's the object. And the mind looks at the object and says, aha, this is real. This is undeniable. It makes contact. So here we have what I was mentioning earlier. Contact being made does not mean just contact between eyes, healthy functioning eyes, and a visible object, or healthy functioning ears and an audible sound. That's not just what we mean by contact. Contact, the most serious kind of contact, in fact, happens between the mind and ideas, thoughts, memories, meaning mental objects. That's the big one. Why? Because as I was explaining earlier, when you have the eyes delivering information to you, making contact with something obscene that is irritating you, it's done. That event took place and the person who was doing those things is gone. Who is left? Is it even there? You can go ahead and smell the ground. That person has left the building. There's nothing there left in time and space except for the mind. The mind is still making contact with now the memory of that event. Is this making sense now? So the contact, already we are in the realm of identification. Okay, But what is grounding us in that, in this case, grounding us in the sense of identification? Remember that emotional tune I was saying? The feeling, in this case, the painful feeling. How could they do that to me? I'm such a nice person. I never did anything to them. Why did they? I don't even know them. They don't even know me. Who's talking here? The mind is still looking at what? The memory. This happened to me. This has happened. This is undeniable. This is undeniable. And because the emotional tune is still there, like an echo, playing nonstop, now we have another loop of what? Is this making sense? Now, if there is attention, that's the interesting, weird looking eye, by the way, looking at the memory or the mind objects, what is this I? Is this something separate? Because what we have here in between these two, so if this is number one, the mind, and mind objects are number two, so mind is one, Dhamma or mind objects are two, what we have here is the fictitious presence of a three. There is no three, but the mind likes to make it a mind that is not wise, not practicing sati. What we call that is mind consciousness. Mano. Vijnana. So the eyes are no longer there, ears are no longer there, but this guy is here, mind consciousness. Again, this happens because of wrongly placed attention and contact persistently being made with the mind object, which in this case are nothing more than memories. Memories. Playback sound of something that is dead, gone. I recall the times when I, as a child or as a barely 20-year-old, my dad showed me a video of where my mom was there in the video, and she had just died, by the way. But in the video, it was from several years earlier, from my childhood. And I was looking at the video, and my mom was very much alive and well, laughing, this and that, but she was dead in reality. That was a memory. That was an image captured, a video, a clip, series of frames playing at a certain, under certain circumstances, but in reality, my mom was gone, dead. The mind was confused. The mind was thinking, wait a minute, is she alive? Mind object. So the mind wanted to identify. Why? Because the attention was there. So that attention is what brings us back to sati. So here, I'll erase this as well. It's basically all about applying what you're learning of the Dhamma and applying it in nowhere else other than in your life. And for that, my experience has been the reliability of emotions, oddly enough, because they are the telltale sign that something's wrong. If you plant, if you grow, you're trying to grow some flowers, and you notice the leaves are behaving weird, and there's no insects, no pests, no nothing, and you're watering it well, this and that, and the weather is fine, it's getting enough sun, etc. Then it's a telltale sign that something's wrong with the soil. There's a lack of nutrients or something. What is that? The leaves are telling you something's wrong with me. So when you are upset, something's wrong with you. Okay? It's not the world around you. When you are angry, something's wrong with you. When you are sad, yes. I'm also a therapist, by the way, okay? There's something wrong with you. No, it's not necessarily biological. It's such a small percentage of people that might get away with saying it, well, it's biological, and science could prove that. But it's temporary. So it's you who's responsible for you feeling sad, angry, upset, and joyful, by the way. Responsible doesn't mean something's wrong, by the way, huh? Because for some reason, just like the word morality, being responsible somehow came out to be, I don't know, austere looking or rigid, dry, hard. That idiotic separation that people still make. I'm surprised that in the 21st century people still believe in left wing and right wing. So responsible means being conservative or right wing or some, just stupid. But coming back to being upset, angry, sad, that means you need to go to work. That means you need to do something with this, because the emotions are telling you something's up. Help me, fix me. And you willfully ignoring that means you are practicing avijja, not panya, not vidya. So sati, what about the eyeball? Remember the eye I was talking about? What is the eye that's looking at the mind objects? Well, sati has everything to do with looking at, meaning the attention. Attention, in Pali, it's manasikāra. But it's not just any attention. We need to look at, remember, what is the contact being made? That is yoniso. That is the point of origin, the matrix. Yoniso manasikāra. That's what we need to have to correct the state of the mind, which brings in, here's the mind, here's the mental object, memory, etc. And it created this union, false union, and it called it manoviññāna, or mind consciousness. Okay? But none of it exists according to Paticca Samuppāda. Why? Because if you place yoniso manasikāra, the right attention on what is happening, you will see that it's just a memory. And the mind is simply doing its job. The memory is there. So long as you have a brain that functions, you're going to have a memory. Okay? Big deal. But so long as you have a mind too, you're going to be detecting. That's the job of a healthy mind. So you don't need to get upset at that. And the fact that this happened. Things happen because they are conditioned. If you were not there, that person was not going to flip you off. Plain and simple. If you were not walking outside on that road, you were not going to be seeing that terrible event that took place, let's say. So it required certain variables. If you remove one of those variables, boom, the whole thing falls apart. So there's no fun left anymore. This gets rid of the emotional tune I was talking about. Being sad, being negative in that sense. The emotional tune has to change. Slowly, slowly, from negative Too positive, you would say. Eventually, when a person comes to state of awakening, what is happening is, what we understand from the suttas, is that this also disappears because there's peace, there's tranquility, and it's quite a remarkable and wonderful state to be in from what we understand being described. It's there's a term in Pali, it's called anidassana vijnana, which is called, in English we can translate it as non-manifestative consciousness. Non-manifestative, that means when the memory shows up, the mind says, oh yes, next. When an event takes place, the mind, of course, sees that and says, yes, I see it. And then you walk away, the event is over. The event is fully over. There is no manovinyana, mind consciousness, to come in and say, hey, remember what happened there? Remember what? No. It's done. It's in the past. That's another reason why arahants do not collect, do not add on more karmic residue. They don't have new karma being made while they're alive anymore. They just have to deal with the karma from the past. So I hope this helps in understanding the role of the lack of sati. Has everything to do with the lack in proper attention, ayoniso manasikāra, right? Think of ayoniso manasikāra as the eyeball of attention, healthy eye looking at what is most important. So this is where wisdom comes in, excuse me, in the application or the directional placement of ayoniso manasikāra, your attention upon what? What are you placing it on? If you place it on the Dhamma, if you place it on understanding through the event, but not look at the event itself as something uniquely happening to me, but saying, oh, yes, this happened. Oh, yes, I did hit my knee against that thing over there. It hurts, yes. But then you look at, oh, look at the color of the blood, or yes, I have to take care of this wound. Okay, okay. Oh, I wonder if I tied it too tight. Okay, and then you walked away and you passed, like you walked and you got in your car and you're driving and you're saying, okay, it feels better now. And then you get home, you apply some ointment or something, and you give it the attention it needs, and you're looking at your emails or you're eating your food, and somebody notices your knee and says, hey, what you do with that? What happened when you yeah, something happened last week. You did not dwell on the fact that somebody over there had placed something in the middle and you didn't see it. It wasn't supposed to be there. You weren't counting on it to be there, but you did accidentally because of someone else's mistake, and you started bleeding. You didn't end up getting upset. You didn't end up calling the police. You didn't end up getting angry. You didn't end up cursing or cussing at that invisible person or that visible person. You just went on with life. Why? Because sati was working beautifully, because the attention was working beautifully. And if you take this even further, Lord Buddha always tells us about asking the right questions. If you ask the right question, you're going to get the right answer. Okay? No ifs and buts about that. So this all comes from the desire to be without suffering. That's what it is. You're not just trying to find tricks of living, how, like, what do you call those nowadays? People use these weird terms. These, somebody might have come up with like biohacking or something like that. You're hacking your system. It's like, they started with computers, hacking the computer, hacking the software, hacker. So they took that and applied it. This transhumanists, probably they're behind it. I don't know. They turn this human body, the brain that we have, the mind, into something that is hackable. Hackable. This shouldn't belong in the same sentence as the mind, the human mind. So what we need to look at, therefore, are these principles that allow us to live without suffering. This itself is a synonym for nibbana, to be free from suffering. Okay? To cut the connection of samsara, the cyclical life after life of torture that we go through all these. But even if you don't believe in rebirth, etc., life without suffering is a good deal. And that itself is what we refer to having as chanda. Chanda here is basically desire. Desire to live without suffering is key to maintain your sati, to maintain the right attention on what's happening. So if your chanda is not there, if you're simply thinking about something else and you're trying to outsmart others, then your chanda is not pure. It's just very, it's basic, it's rudimentary, it's even low, actually, vulgar even. Why? Because it does not bring in a long-term state of living without suffering. So this has to be there. This is what everything relies on ultimately, because sati will be forgotten if your chanda is weak. Chanda comes first. Okay, Lord Buddha says, chanda comes first. Even though many people have made the wrong assumption that Buddhism against desire, no, when you look at it in this context, that's just a bogus statement, because chanda is at the core of the Dhammic path. To want to live without suffering is chanda. Come on. So chanda leads us. Chanda of what? Living without suffering. Chanda of wanting to attain nibbana. There's nothing wrong with that. As I was saying, they're one and the same. But that chanda, if it's strong enough, it will maintain your sati despite whatever happens. And it will cause you to place the attention, ayoniso manasikāra, upon the mind object and see it as simply a memory of an event that took place. To see an emotion, and that's it. Because an emotion is not something separate from the mind. Okay? It is registering upon the mind as a perception which the mind is seeing, which is turning it into a mind object. But if your attention is on that, if you're practicing ayoniso manasikāra, which is wrong attention application upon, in this case, the wrong object, then your sati is not there, because you're soon enough going to be sucked into the vortex, the black hole of emotions, and you are definitely going to be living in suffering. So if your chanda is strong enough to want to understand and to be wise, it's going to quickly pull you out, thanks to sati, thanks to sampajanyas, because you're saying, wait a minute, I'm still having this, my heart is racing. Why? Why am I upset? What is this emotional tune that's playing, the echo throughout my day? I don't have a reason to be upset. That questioning itself is already breaking you from the pattern, the vicious cycle of suffering. So I'll stop here and I'll see you next time.